The married woman actually fell in love with a garbage collector while taking out the trash, yet her husband surprisingly accepted her behavior. Before all this, Miko was just an ordinary housewife. She had met her husband through an arranged blind date, and soon after, their parents arranged the marriage. But after a few years of marriage, there wasn't much affection between them. Her husband was constantly busy with work and social gatherings, and her mother-in-law was extremely harsh toward her. Even so, Miko still insisted on diligently doing housework and cooking because she believed that was a wife's responsibility. But her husband never appreciated it. He wouldn't even look her in the eye. This kind of life, Miko didn't exactly hate, but she only accepted it out of habit. Until one morning, when Miko went outside to throw out the trash, she almost had her hands caught by the lid of the garbage truck. At that moment, a garbage collector named Hiro saved her. With just one glance, Miko fell in love with the young man. She finally experienced the feeling of love. From then on, every time Miko went to take out the trash, she would carefully dress herself up, and Hiro gradually began to feel something for her as well. Just like that, they quickly fell in love. When she was with Hiro, Miko's title changed from madam to girl. She loved being called that, maybe because she had finally tasted love. Miko asked her husband for a divorce. Her husband was furious when he heard it. He only left her with one sentence: "You'll regret this." Then he slammed the door and left. But Miko believed she would never regret it. She was only chasing after love and the happiness of her future life. Miko resolutely moved into Hiro's home. Hiro often smiled and praised her cooking. Just one word of praise was enough to move Miko deeply, because no one had ever complimented her like that. After being with Hiro, Miko finally felt the warmth of a real home. But Hiro couldn't help but wonder why Miko would love him, since his job was nothing more than collecting garbage. But Miko told him that when he was collecting trash, he looked like he was glowing. Because of Hiro, she began to look forward to life. After living together for a while, Hiro worked even harder for Miko, and Miko came to understand the hardships of Hiro's work. Trash often contained dangerous things: broken glass, old skewers, rusty nails. Just thinking about it made Miko feel heartbroken for Hiro. Hiro also knew how to be romantic. During meals, he would arrange food in his bowl into romantic words. With Hiro, even the little bits of unhappiness in Miko's heart would be dissolved like garbage. They were equals and needed each other. It was never just one-sided giving. They both found the passion of new love in each other. The next day, Miko prepared dinner, but Hiro didn't come home on time. She called him several times, but none went through. Being in love, Miko's mind began to wander. She couldn't help but picture all kinds of accidents happening to Hiro. But even if something really did happen to him, no one would contact her, because she was just a married woman Hiro had met by chance while collecting trash, and their relationship was something people would never approve of. Just as her thoughts were spiraling, Hiro finally came home. It turned out he had only been working overtime. The moment Miko saw him, she threw her arms around him tightly. She didn't mind the stench of dirty water at all. Hiro gently comforted her, and promised that if he ever came home late again, he would tell her beforehand. Then Hiro brought up the idea of marrying her. A few days later, as her younger sister's wedding approached, her sister called to invite her. Over the phone, her sister also relayed her brother-in-law's words. In fact, before Miko moved in with Hiro, her husband had already hired a private investigator. He had found out everything there was to know about Hiro. Now, if Miko wanted to come back, her husband would never forgive her. But if Miko was truly determined to be with Hiro, then he was willing to let her go to Hiro. After all, no matter how unhappy their marriage had been before, he still hoped Miko could find happiness of her own. At that moment, Miko sincerely thanked her husband. She promised her sister that she would attend the wedding. Miko was only pursuing her own happiness, and she wasn't ashamed to face anyone. Miko and Hiro's actions were indeed too hasty. They went against common sense. Such behavior is usually not advisable, but having the courage and ability to pursue happiness, and finally achieving a harmonious ending, was still a fortunate thing. Kosa was about to turn 40. 40 was the age when people were supposed to move up into leadership. It was also the age when younger people found it easy to mock you. That day, Kosa lay in bed. She thought back to her middle school days and the dreams she had for adulthood: falling in love, getting married, becoming a gentle mother. Now, after all these years, not a single one of those dreams had come true. The reason these memories suddenly came to her was because she had recently received an invitation to her middle school reunion. On the invitation, there was a name Kosa knew all too well, Kishida. He was her first love. So, on the day of the reunion, Kosa dressed herself up with extra care. She hoped that this version of herself would catch Kishida's eye. If Kishida was single, just like her, that would be perfect. On the way to the reunion, Kosa rehearsed 3 different ways to introduce herself to Kishida. She wanted to show that she was doing well, while also subtly hinting that she was still single. When she arrived at the venue, the person who greeted her was once the ugliest girl in the class. Now, she had become beautiful and elegant. The manager of the restaurant, with a loving husband and a cute son, Kosa had never expected that someone who once lagged behind her would now be living a better life than she was. Of course, for every female classmate who had both love and a career, there was a male classmate whose hairline had receded all the way to the back of his head, and those school queen level beauties from back then might have completely changed their looks. The conversations among classmates mostly revolved around showing off, but Kosa wasn't interested in any of that. She only cared about where Kishida was, as the reunion was about to end, and Kosa hovered at the edge of drunkenness. She never expected that the absent Kishida would suddenly bump into her as she walked out of the restroom. Memories instantly rushed back into Kosa's mind. Back then, Kishida had been special, always laughing. He deeply attracted her. It didn't take long before Kosa confessed to him herself. That summer vacation after, they often went to the movies and the amusement park together. They even kissed, but because it was her first time, Kosa missed the chance to close her eyes. All she remembered was a world shining with dazzling lights everywhere, but that happiness only lasted for about 3 weeks. After that, Kishida's phone stopped working, until, just a few days before school started again, Kosa saw Kishida walking with an older female student. In that instant, Kosa's world collapsed, and so, that short-lived first love came to an end. Now, meeting again after all these years, Kishida didn't know what to say. He only exchanged a few polite greetings. Then Kosa suddenly noticed that Kishida wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Her heart leapt so much she almost jumped. And so, as they talked, they ended up going to a hotel. While chatting, Kosa expressed herself, while also carefully probing Kishida, hoping he could understand her feelings. When the topic turned to marriage, Kishida suddenly perked up. He said that although he wasn't married yet, he still hoped that after coming home from work every day, there would be a wife waiting with a hot meal. Then, Kishida pulled out a manual for cookware and immediately started recommending it to Kosa. In the dim pink light of the room, Kosa was stunned. She realized that this man was actually a cookware salesman, but when she thought about the happy married life he had just described, she still found it beautiful. So Kosa paid on the spot and brought home a set of pots. However, when she called the number on his business card the next day, she discovered she had been scammed. At that moment, a friend called and told Kosa that Kishida hadn't even attended the reunion. That was when Kosa realized she had mistaken someone else for him. But afterward, Kosa really did start learning how to cook. After all, she had spent a lot of money on those pots. And as for the real Kishida, she never tried to contact him. Maybe it was because Kosa had come to understand that her obsession had already gone beyond time and love itself. At the age of 40, to be able to rediscover the honesty and courage of her younger self was already enough. Mayo was the mother of 2 teenagers. She was always gentle, but the downside of being gentle was that neither her son nor her daughter really took her seriously. They even thought she was naggy. Her daughter hadn't come home for several days, so even when she occasionally heard news of young people getting into trouble, Mayo couldn't help but get nervous. Mayo poured all of her time and energy into her family. Even a good night's sleep was a luxury for her. She worked a night shift at a convenience store as a cashier. Her son's old jacket and her daughter's old sweater were her work uniform. Her co-workers often complimented her fashionable look. Of course, she knew they were being sarcastic, but she didn't bother arguing. She simply didn't have the energy. All her strength was spent on taking care of her family. After the store closed for the night, a co-worker named Hamazaki invited Mayo out for drinks. She declined, saying she had to make breakfast for her family. Then the store manager quietly reminded Mayo to be careful around Hamazaki. The next morning, while making a bento for her husband, Mayo kept worrying about her daughter who hadn't come home. Her son had returned, but he wouldn't wake up until noon. Mayo also wanted to sleep soundly for once, but there were still piles of chores waiting for her. After sending her husband off, Mayo finally had a moment to rest. She had barely lain down when her daughter came home. Before Mayo could say anything, her daughter threw down her school bag and went to shower. That was fine, too. After all, compared to figuring out how to talk to her daughter, Mayo wanted to sleep more, but as soon as she closed her eyes, worries started crowding into her mind. Had her daughter already picked up bad habits? Where had she been staying for those 5 nights away from home? So while her daughter was showering, Mayo checked her school bag. Finding nothing unusual, she felt relieved. When her daughter came out of the shower, Mayo tried asking where she had been staying, but after just one question, her daughter got impatient. This was Mayo's daily life, and she had long gotten used to it. Lately, Mayo's mother was also giving her headaches. Visiting her mother meant sacrificing the little sleep she had. Her mother always said, "Don't force yourself to come," but if Mayo didn't visit, she would get endless phone calls of complaints. Just then, her husband came home and said it had started pouring rain outside. Hearing that, Mayo hurried to the balcony to bring in the laundry. When she returned to the room, her mother was still complaining on the phone. In that instant, all her bottled-up grievances came rushing out. So Mayo yanked out the phone line, tossed her husband a simple bento, and headed out to work. Before she left, her husband told her to take the bus. Mayo gave a bitter smile inside, because he hadn't even noticed that buses had already stopped running at that hour, since she had to walk in the rain. By the time Mayo arrived at the store, she was soaked through. A coworker quickly lent her a change of clothes, but the outfit didn't really suit her. When Hamazaki saw Mayo dressed like that, he eagerly came over to chat her up. Mayo quickly changed the subject. She asked if Hamazaki could use the employee discount to help her buy her husband a set of sale-priced pajamas. Not only did Hamazaki agree, he even went to fetch them for her. Once she got the pajamas, Mayo wanted to go straight home, but strangely, her bike had been stolen. Hamazaki immediately offered to drive her home. Remembering the manager's warning, Mayo wanted to refuse, but at that moment, all she wanted was to get home and sleep. And then what she feared happened. Hamazaki suddenly sped up the car. He explained that he wanted to take Mayo out for a drink. At that point, Mayo should have resisted, but instead, she stayed surprisingly calm, because she was already so drained. All she wanted was sleep. Where she ended up didn't matter anymore. When they pulled up to a hotel, a thought suddenly struck her. If even a woman like her could attract a man's attention, how much more vulnerable was her beautiful daughter? The moment she thought of her daughter, Mayo snapped back to her senses. She shouted for help in front of the hotel. A security guard came and took Hamazaki away. Mayo couldn't even remember how she got home after that. All she knew was that she had barely closed her eyes when her daughter woke her up. Her daughter sneered, "Sleeping in broad daylight. How leisurely." The words cut deep, filling Mayo with unspeakable sadness. Her daughter said she wanted to move out, to live with a friend, until she could afford her own place, because just thinking about coming back home filled her with depression. She hated seeing her mother's face. She hated her mother's way of life. She absolutely did not want to become like her mother. To her daughter, her mother wasn't a source of warmth, but a heavy psychological burden. Her daughter's outburst and departure made Mayo start doubting herself completely. At that moment, maybe she should have chased after her daughter, but all she wanted to do was collapse on the floor and sleep. Very quickly, Mayo drifted off. When her son woke her at dusk, it felt as if she had suddenly realized something. She hung up on her mother's complaint-filled call. Then she demanded to use her son's new bicycle to get to work. Her son instantly refused. Mayo slapped him across the face. Both her son and her husband were stunned. From that moment on, Mayo seemed like a completely different person. First, she went to her mother's house. She stated her position clearly, saying she wasn't living her life only for her mother. Then she went to the store. She threw herself into work with enthusiasm. The manager had thought Mayo would quit after what happened with Hamazaki, but Mayo firmly said that was nothing. Now she finally understood. Only by living her own life well could she influence and guide her daughter's future. Mayo would continue to live with confidence and strength.